All right, everyone, let's get the show started. Welcome to our DevOps office hours. It's October 27th, 2021. My name is Eric Osterman, and I'm going to be leading the conversation. I'm the founder and CEO of Cloud Posse. We're a DevOps accelerator, and that means that we help companies own their infrastructure in record time by building it together with your team while showing them the ropes. So if that sounds interesting, head over to cloudposse.com/quiz to get started. Again, cloudposse.com/quiz to get started. For those of you new to the call, the format's very informal. My goal is to get your questions answered. So if you want to jump in and participate, just go ahead and unmute yourself and jump in. If you're tuning in from our podcast or YouTube channel, you can register for these live and interactive sessions by going to cloudposse.com/officehours. Again, that's cloudposse.com/officehours. Our call today is recorded. We host these calls every week. We'll automatically post a video recording of this session to our YouTube channel, as well as syndicate it to our podcast. So you can tune in however you'd like to stay up to speed on what we talk about. So with that said, let's jump into some announcements over the past week. It feels like this is the week of conferences with basically 3 parallel major conferences going online. And I guess they can get away with it now because everything's gone virtual, everything's gone online, so they don't have to compete for hotel rooms and attention. So there was the Datadog Dash conference, some pretty exciting announcements that came out of that I want to go over. There was HashiConf Global. I want to actually turn this over to everyone here, see what we got out of that, and the GitHub Universe. So let me jump into, not that. Gonna jump into one of the announcements I saw here that was highlighted, actually by one of our customers, pointed this one out to me. I really like it. So Datadog is now basically natively supporting eBPF, and it's a feature flag you can enable in the agent. And this gives you almost like service mesh level telemetry from everything that you have your Datadog agents deployed. So what are some of the cool things you can get out of that? You can get automatic service maps of how traffic flows between your services. You can get automatic telemetry to understand the standard golden signals between your services, error rates and throughput and duration metrics. So what's cool about this is without really even lifting a finger in instrumenting your applications and services and adding more metrics and monitors, you get this out of the box. And it integrates with SLOs. And one of the things we've been looking in or talking a lot on here at Office Hours is SLOs and how that should work. And I really think it's nice that Datadog has the concept of an SLO as a first-class primitive that you can define what your targets are for your SLO, what your error budget is, and it calculates and creates a little widget for you on the fly. So I think this is a very nice addition to Datadog that as soon as it's GA, we will be signing up for. Anyone else check out that announcement? Something you'd like to add? All right. Then
I was going to just say one quick thing is that it's really great for out-of-the-box stuff. Like if your app is HTTP request driven, but if it's not, then you still have to do some instrumentation to make it work.
Yeah, exactly. So if it's some lower level layer 4 protocol,
or like a scheduled job, or RPC or gRPC, or any of those types of things. They have you have to actually do some tweaking to make all that kind of stuff work. Yeah. Queue-based, if it's talking like over Kafka, between services or any of that kind of thing.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. So it handles, it's like the 80-20. Like for most people, most companies whose concerns are strictly around REST requests and HTTP requests. Yeah. Looks like they've also introduced UDP and WebSocket tests, kind of related, but not related. I guess we've added already support for private location monitoring to our Datadog platform. I know it was an opt-in feature, so maybe now it's GA. So that's kind of cool. You can deploy an agent inside of your VPC and then use that to internally test services and have it reported within Datadog. I thought this was interesting. You can be alerted if sensitive data is appearing in your logs. Now, if you could do automatic retroactive redaction, that'd be also kind of cool, but I don't think there's any ability to redact yet retroactively.
Especially if you have idempotent logs.
Yeah.
Or I didn't mean idempotent. I mean
immutable.
Immutable logs.
I
don't know where that went in my head. Immutable logs. There's no way to change that. Yes.
Yeah, there's no way to change it, but like at least be able to filter it out based on tags, perhaps, that can be added after the fact. So it's permissions based. They've been doubling down on observability for GitHub Actions as well, CI visibility. Now, I've been stalking the Datadog Datadog GitHub organization. And if you look in some of their open source repos, you can see how they're using GitHub Actions for their own workflows that send back telemetry to Datadog. We haven't yet had a chance to implement it, but I'm very excited about this because it's been one of the biggest missing features of GitHub Actions. And frankly, I don't know if I want GitHub Actions to solve it. I really think it is better represented in a general purpose monitoring platform like Datadog. I'm assuming you're a Datadog customer.
I mean, GitHub could be nice and export open telemetry tracing and metrics for the builds and logs and send them to an endpoint.
That would be cool.
Maybe
that would be cool.
storing them in S3
open
too.
Telemetry would be cool. Yeah. My point is, I don't want them to have to reinvent all the hoopla about doing good reports and monitors here, because in the end, I'm still going to want something different. And unless they integrated with like a generic solution like Looker, that I don't know how it worked. Plus, it's then still not integrated with the rest of the stuff we do. Let's see what else.
So I'll post in the channel, but Scrib, the company I work for, has an open source GitHub action for reporting on telemetry for pull request times and stuff like this. Anyone's interested?
Oh, no way. Please share.
Yeah.
Actually, we are working on something very similar to Cloud Posse for our own purposes.
So you can either crib off it or use it. Yeah, I'll share it.
Exactly. Yeah.
Honeycomb has one too. It's built by a community member. I've used it in the past. It works pretty well, especially because you get to see trends of what's happening and build time slowly increasing, get a lot more visible.
Yeah.
Wait,
how does Honeycomb work? Or what where does it send the telemetry?
To Honeycomb.
Oh, I don't know Honeycomb as a service even.
The observability platform, they're, in my view, the leaders. Honeycomb.io. Okay. And yeah, not very helpful.
That was not what I was trying to look up.
Give me a second to actually find the link to the... With OpenTelemetry becoming the standard for this, a lot of... Oops, sorry, give me a second. A lot of... Good job. Safari is being weird, sorry. A lot of... No, this is not it. A lot of providers are now forced to actually start getting better platforms because there's, well, not really, but the difference in how good your agents were is going away. Like, you cannot say anymore that, oh, Datadog has awesome PHP agents and New Relic has awesome .NET capture agents and you really should use that. No, they're now pretty standard. They're all great and you can send to pretty much anybody. But give me a second to actually find that link. It's in my stars, but I, of course, cannot find it.
Yeah.
While you had Honeycomb up there, it's worth mentioning that Charity Majors, who's the founder, has a lot of blog posts and tweets and other stuff around observability and running applications in production and everything. So if you want to read some really good content on that subject, she's a really good read.
Oh, cool.
Just
Can you
in
share
general.
that? Can you share that one in the office hours Slack as well,
Sure.
Matt? Now check that out.
I finally found it. This is the action. I posted it in the Zoom, in the Slack chat. I can post it in the Zoom
All right,
too.
I got it here.
It's basically a wrapper action that starts at when your workflow starts and adds steps at the end and continuously sends data about what's happening. You can look at the code; it's surprisingly light.
This is cool. Let me start this and come back to it. This is highly relevant to some of the stuff that we're working on that I want to be able to get telemetry out from the GitHub action workflows we're building with customers.
When GitHub added the option to actually be able to start an action at the top of the workflow, and then when the workflow ends, finish that action and still do stuff, it opened up a lot of doors for projects exactly like this.
So that's an interesting case. So I know I didn't. The way you described it is not the way I knew you could do it. I know you can have something like a, what do you call it? Something that runs always at the end of the task, and you can always obviously have an action that runs something that always runs at the end of the workflow.
The last paragraph on the screen. So
yeah,
GHA build events is a wrapping action.
Wrapping action. So that's actually what that is a technical term in GitHub Actions for what it is.
I think so.
Yeah, it's similar to like caching actions and stuff like that you can define in your GitHub action that you want to run a step after, and you can say like if it's on success or on failure or no.
Mm-hmm. Oh, that's cool. I'll make sure we are up to speed on that one. Another minor announcement was just RDS has finally released, so RDS Proxy has finally released support for MySQL 8. Previously, I think it was only MySQL 5. RDS Proxy is nice if you need to do connection pooling for Lambdas so that you don't overload your downstream RDS database.
Two other interesting news from AWS is that the AWS load balancer controller for Kubernetes now supports IPv6 targets. So we're getting closer to finally getting rid of IPv4 limitations for big Kubernetes clusters. It's still far away. IPv6 only clusters are interesting, and I'll leave it at that. But it's getting better. I'm hoping we're going to see something at re:Invent about this. I don't know. And that was the first announcement. And the second one was just from today. I posted the links in the Zoom and Slack for the announcements. And today they officially launched the beta of SAM Accelerate, which is basically if you're using AWS SAM, you can run a watcher on your laptop as you're developing code that just immediately replaces the code in the Lambda that you're using in your SAM thing. So instead of going through the whole CloudFormation step and taking forever, it's just doing an API call ASAP to replace the code. It works pretty well. It integrates with CloudWatch logs and X-Ray. No external provider integration yet, so no Datadog, unfortunately. But for a developer experience, this is awesome.
It's like
it's
probably
probably
dev for SAM. Yeah.
Sorry, I was going to say it's probably worth noting that the serverless framework also just released serverless. It's called Serverless Cloud. Really bad name, but really cool. And basically, it's the same thing. You basically can develop and it real-time syncs to your own personal like development instance in the cloud for functions and all of that kind. Not exactly the same thing. I know SAM like emulates it locally, but the same kind of developer experience. But it's pretty cool how that all works as well.
Serverless
it
Cloud
was-
does it in less than a second, which is awesome.
I think it's really cool that they came out with this offering. It's a logical next step for them to monetize what they built with serverless, the framework.
Yeah, I've been chatting with them a little bit on their Slack channel for this as well, and they are they have some interesting plans. So they also use this. It's not just for development, but you can also do. It's got like a deployment and environment awareness. So you can say like, deploy this to this environment. You can clone an entire environment, and they have primitives for like storing data in DynamoDB that you don't need to know how DynamoDB works. You can just say like data.store, blah, blah, blah. And you can copy data to multiple environments and clone things and do a lot. So I've been pretty impressed with it so far, but still it's in it.
Can you point it at an AWS account ID that you control?
Yeah.
Or
wait.
Oh.
Not yet.
Not
You
yet.
can't. It's coming on the roadmap. Sorry, I did ask that. But right now, it deploys it because they run some sort of like builds process in their AWS accounts to accept this. You can't do that yet, but they said they're looking at getting that on the roadmap done. So
That'd be pretty rad.
They went into a bit of a weird direction. They also mentioned that you're going to be able to install this into your own data center on your own Kubernetes cluster, which is not what I expected to do. And I'll leave it at that. If you scroll, there's Kubernetes mentioned somewhere on this page, because of course it has to be.
Does that mean like they have their own Knative distribution that they built it to work with or something? Yeah.
I haven't looked into it, no idea. And I think that is just a roadmap thing. I don't think you can do it right now. Am I correct, Matt?
That's correct. So what they have like an API that will be consistent, and then underneath the hood they have these things called builders, and then the builders take like your serverless YAML file basically that's getting created, and then they render it into actual infrastructure. And they're saying that they eventually will be able to do it to a Kubernetes cluster rather than a cloud. That's kind of their idea. And I think right now it only works on AWS. They also expect to move to Azure and Google Cloud on the roadmap as well. So
Pretty cool.
But clearly it's great to actually see these companies now focusing on the developer experience of serverless, because for way too long that's been such a shitty experience for everyone to deal with. So I'm glad
Terraform
to see
is not the answer.
It is not. I agree.
Yeah, cool.
In the same vein, I don't know if you saw the CockroachDB serverless announcement I think it was a couple of days ago. I posted the links in the Slack, but it's pretty interesting how they, and I posted also the technical part, which they put out on Monday, which was interesting. That's like the marketing part, and the other one was like the technical part. It's pretty interesting how they did it, and I think it's gonna most likely be a game changer for a lot of people to have a SQL database that is entirely serverless.
Remind me, CockroachDB, their origin is in providing a MySQL compatible database that was very easily deployable to Kubernetes or containerized environments. Was that where Cockroach started? Yeah.
They started on making
Postgres.
a Postgres database that is distributed.
Okay.
So
Postgres.
yeah.
So, when we say CockroachDB serverless in this mode, and what they showed that it's deploying here, is this then saying that it's managed by them?
Yeah, right now you cannot.
Your account?
Yeah, right now you cannot like deploy it on your own thing.
Okay.
And but eventually, well, I guess most of the thing with serverless is you want managed service, but you might want to have like on your own system. But yeah, it's pretty interesting because then it's similar to like DynamoDB where you pay per write and read. So you have like Planet Scale that goes in that direction. You have CockroachDB that goes in that direction, and they compete with the NoSQLs like Fauna and all those others database in that space.
Yeah.
Does
Emil,
this
if you
compare
when you,
with Aurora serverless?
Yeah, it's better than Aurora serverless. Scales more, and it's just like more faster to scale.
Mm.
The
how would you compare the pricing?
technical blog is pretty interesting if you want to read it, how they did it, and they just separated their storage node from their like compute nodes and everything. So it's pretty interesting.
Emil, how would you compare the pricing to, because you have your base cost of like what you would
Mm.
essentially pay to run it yourself on your own, similar cloud infrastructure, and then you have your kind of managed services premium that you kind of get
Yeah.
for being on this multi-tenant environment. Like, what would you say that margin is?
It's hard. I didn't really check the pricing for larger scale projects, but I'm guessing those are for like smaller scale, and then you upgrade to like your own cluster when you're big enough, and it makes more financial sense. But I think because like the base cluster I think starts at like 350 USD something for like 3 machines. So I'm pretty sure you for like a lot of smaller projects or smaller startups you can go, because they scale up and down. So like most of the time, if you don't have traffic during the night, you won't have any cost. So I think you can save a lot of money with the serverless on the long run.
Yeah, I think the target that I saw on that is like, oh, it's right there on. Oh no, sorry, I think it's Aurora, like that they're basically sort of comparing themselves to, and it's much less expensive, and it's also got some things that Aurora just doesn't have. Like you can basically write to any node in the cluster, and it uses Raft basically to do data synchronization placement to get it done, and they it does a bunch of cool stuff that Aurora doesn't do. So I don't know. It's pretty cool looking. I've never actually used it myself, but I've read a lot about it.
Right. And the API is Postgres.
Yeah, they
Yeah, it's
support. Yeah,
yeah,
not
supposed to look
everything.
just like Postgres.
I don't think you can have like. I'm not sure if they work with triggers or stuff like that, but like I know for the base, they understand Postgres pretty well. So
Pretty cool. Thank you.
Cool. So let's transition over to HashiConf. Has anybody been paying attention to the talks there? Any interesting announcements or observations that came out of it? I have not been able to attend. Crickets. All right. Moving on to GitHub Universe, the other conference apparently going on at the same time. Here's what I want to hear is like, you can now have private shared action, private GitHub actions. You can now have, private GitHub workflows. Environments are now GA for everyone, even businesses. And what's the other announcement I want to hear is workflows are now also available for business plan. Or shared workflows are now available for teams in GitHub Business. So
probably, I think you're gonna be disappointed.
Yeah, that's too bad. On the one side, I'm really happy GitHub is innovating finally and coming out with all these things. On the other hand, I'm really sad that it's not available to a lot of our customers because they are not on GitHub Enterprise yet. Cloud Posse, we are doing all open source, so we have access to it for any open source repos, well, as does anyone. But for teams and business, it's not available. Most of those cool features.
They
Matt,
have
you
an
had some
open
stat.
roadmap now.
Okay.
Are your requests at least on the roadmap?
Oh yes, there. Well, everything I've said has been implemented, but it's not on the roadmap for going to, teams or business. I don't see it ever going that way. Like that is their whole business model, that they want to, funnel users into enterprise agreements with GitHub. You're talking about their public roadmap repo, like the GitHub project, right?
Their public roadmap thing where you can comment or upload thing.
No, this is the one I follow very closely. And filtering for cloud.
Yeah, I was just going to add that the only interesting thing I saw coming out of it was that they did announce that there are over 10,000 public GitHub action or published GitHub actions now at this point. They just crossed that mark. So that's both great and also a little scary, because how can you possibly vet the ones that don't come from, from the really well-known companies that you know about, that they're doing the right thing.
Have
And
there
especially
been
if you don't pin to a specific revision that you've vetted, if you always point to latest or whatever, that gets a little scary.
specific commit SHA? I mean, that's the other thing to really point out, like with GitHub Actions, especially as, one of the beautiful things about GitHub Actions and GitHub Action runners is, unlike every other CI platform out there, CD platform, they actually don't charge if you want to use bring your own runners. So I love that. The difference though, or it's not the difference, but the concern here is, and then you're also running these potentially untrusted actions with whatever permissions, boundaries, or scope that your on-prem runners have, which might be permissions, inside of your VPC, things that, special IAM service accounts that can maybe assume roles to Kubernetes clusters and modify S3 buckets. And heck, maybe some people are even making it deploy Terraform and then giving it God mode. So God help us when some hackers wise up and do a supply chain attack on major GitHub Actions out there. Has anybody seen any reports of compromised GitHub Actions yet in the wild? They've got to be there somewhere.
I haven't, but when you have 10,000 actions, there's got to be some. Like,
yeah, exactly.
Especially anyone can publish an action, right? So it's like not, I don't know. Unfortunately, I was gonna say, JavaScript is definitely one of those things.
I didn't see like the actions per se, but I see they did a lot of work on restricting who can run the actions. Like first-time contributors by default now, if you're a first-time contributor to a repository, you need an approval from the maintainer to run the actions of that repository, because they had problems of leaks because of that. But I didn't see any attacks on the actions themselves.
And that was also the crypto miners. They were really trying to thwart. I mean, those are good. I'll say one of the ones we really hate is that they stop running scheduled actions on repositories if there hasn't been a commit in 90 days. And you have to do that with like a bot token or something so that, you can rejigger the whole system. So now we got to do that because we were relying on this, and then now suddenly all our repos are getting stale again because sometimes there hasn't been a relevant update.
What if your workflow makes commits? Does that count? Because I have
it counts but you have to have that, but it can't. I believe it can't. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I can't use the token of the dynamic token of the workflow. It has to use a bot token, so a alternating.
Right.
If you're using the token from the actions, it's not going to trigger any new actions because they don't want people to go into an infinite loop of creating actions, which is a fair point. But I would like...
I have an action that does scheduled backups of Datadog, right? So like that needs to just kind of run.
But that's going to has it been running over 90 days? Because if it has, it's not running anymore.
To be fair, you do get an email with a button like click here if you still want to run the workflows after 90 days. But it's an email.
But when you have like 300 repos and you keep getting those emails, it's impossible to stay on top of them.
So we need that email to go to Zapier, and Zapier then
send it to SES.
Exactly.
And then we'll trigger a Lambda that actually opens it.
Yeah, just scrape the link out of your emails and forward that email to the Lambda function to curl the link.
Yeah, dispatch an action that run. No. All right, that's good stuff. What else? All right, and last thing to talk about, who's going to reInvent? I just got my tickets, so I'm excited to go this year since it's back back in business. So that's cool, Jim. And what was the Antar you're going? So we should, yeah, well, as we get closer to the date, I think it's end of November. We will solicit more.
Will Cloud Posse have a booth for just like?
No, I don't think we're gonna have a booth, but I'm definitely gonna be personally hanging out mostly just in the vendor area. I don't really go for the talks. I go for social aspects and meeting everybody, and I look forward to that opportunity.
Will there be will you kind of preload us with Cloud Posse t-shirts that we can wear to kind of spread brand awareness?
I
Hey,
like
I would
like the way you think. I like the way you think. I should
I
do
would
that.
totally rock the Cloud Posse t-shirt or a
Yeah.
hat.
Yeah, that's a great idea. I will put that down on as an idea here. So let's move on to questions. We had a good, two good questions came up from Sharif, posted in the office hour Slack. He also posted a whole lot of context. If you haven't seen the context for his questions, it's worthwhile giving that a once over. It's quite long, so I'm not going to read through the whole thing. I'm kind of just going to jump to conclusions and share my thoughts on these two things. So Sharif is a relatively new member to our Slack community and office hours, but he's been using the Cloud Posse modules and starting to get indoctrinated in a little bit of the way we think about things. He mentions kind of like our 4 layers of infrastructure and how we think about doing that. So what he's looking at doing right now is how to implement what he's calling on-demand environments, what we at Cloud Posse call preview environments, and maybe what Heroku calls review apps. So how do you do those on-demand environments, say for 5 interdependent services, so a small service-oriented architecture, and how do you do that using the practices of GitOps with Terraform, and how do you do that possibly using Argo CD? How do you use Argo CD together with Terraform? And how do you build this all on your own without any other managed solutions like M0, Spacelift, Terraform Cloud, Scalar, etc.? Well, I think this is a great talking point. And I'd like to first of all hear how others do it as well, but I'll talk about how we've approached it. I think one of the hardest things with continuous delivery is when continuous delivery spans different tool sets. So in this case, maybe GitHub Actions, and then Terraform, and Argo CD, and let's consider migrations as an aspect of continuous delivery of delivering database changes. So how do you coordinate that? And how do you what happens if there are failures, and how do you, well, for this case with preview environments, you're probably not going to have any approval steps. If you were going to have approval steps, that really complicates this whole thing. And let's see here. So the TLDR from my perspective that I tell customers is for preview environments, you really, actually, I wrote this up recently in our documentation. So it's good to, let's see here. I brought up the wrong one. Yeah, it's a design decision. We're calling RefArch 425, decide on strategy for preview environments. So here are some of the considerations. These are considerations largely targeted towards customers on Kubernetes. And what my recommendations are is really use as few AWS proprietary services as part of doing that, because combining Terraform with your ephemeral environments, while it can be done, and I'll tell you how it can be done, I discourage it, because it probably doesn't lead to the outcome you actually want. So what are some of the assumptions we want? We want these environments to come online fast. We don't want to wait 45 minutes for our environment to come online, because we did it the right way, using Terraform, using RDS, using MSK. You know, RDS Aurora clusters can take like half an hour, 45 minutes to come online. MSK clusters, the same thing. So if we're trying to be proper about this and deploy exactly what we have in staging and production for preview environments, we're on the wrong track. So that's why I say try and avoid some of these managed services that have no open source analog or something that we can do containerized. I've heard interesting suggestions like, what about using local stack inside of Kubernetes so you can simulate and do it faster? I like the idea. We haven't done it. Sounds like one of those fun R&D projects. Again, the reason here isn't to conserve costs. I don't like that excuse. It's to actually deliver a better developer experience, QA experience where these environments come online faster. So what do you do then if you can't use those? So like if you're using DocumentDB, well, for your preview environments, you're going to be deploying a MongoDB container. If you're using MSK, well, you're obviously going to be doing the Kafka container. If you're using Elasticsearch Redis, you're going to be using the Redis container. Those come up in seconds. They don't take minutes, and you're sticking within the whole Kubernetes manifest environment of writing YAML manifest. So if you still technically need to do AWS resources for these preview environments, well, okay, you can use Terraform. Like if you're on Terraform Enterprise or Terraform Cloud, you can use the Terraform custom resource to provision stuff that way. It gets really kind of weird if you think about Kubernetes managing all this other infrastructure, and then also like if you're in a dev environment, or if you want to destroy that Kubernetes cluster, but that Kubernetes cluster now suddenly manages a lot of state outside of it, you actually have to be very proper about destroying everything that was provisioned inside the Terraform, inside the Kubernetes cluster before bringing down that Kubernetes cluster. I mean, you should do that anyways. Maybe we take some shortcuts, and we don't always do that. We just say destroy cluster and worry about the rest. The next thing is hold on, Charlie, no. The next thing is if you are depending on things like the API gateway. Again, very similar to the other things. Dynamically working with the API gateway maybe means we're working with Terraform again, and that's the whole thing we're trying to avoid. So if you are using API gateway, how are you going to solve updating it dynamically in this environment? Other considerations are these preview environments. Make sure you're doing it for the right reason. Are you really trying to create remote development environments? Or are you truly doing it for QA, like validating that this pull request does what it said it was supposed to do before it goes into your develop branch or your trunk or main or wherever you're deploying? So, because if it is for development, there may be better tools for doing this. If you're in the Kubernetes world, then that would be like Scaffold or Garden.io or Tilt.dev. There are a few solutions there, and those are I think open core. Most of the ones I talked about, and then there's some pay to play solutions for them. Then the other important mindset shift here for your preview environments is that these are not a replacement for your staging or QA environments for multiple reasons. One is we've just made all these concessions. We're not going to use RDS. We're not going to use MSK. So they're not really proper analogs for a staging or QA environment. You're testing more of the functionality that this pull request is supposed to deliver, but in terms of performance and proper integration testing with the services, that's where these other environments come into place. The last consideration is a really interesting one, because there's preconceived notions on what you want when you're saying you want to bring up all the related services for your application. Make sure you have had conversations with your developers or other stakeholders on what their expectations are. Like they might be thinking like, yeah, we want to bring up this service at this version, this other service on this other branch at that version, this third service in another version. How are you going to capture those requirements of the versions of the services? And you might say the easy answer to this is just, well, in my pull request, I'm just going to update the environments file and say the versions I want. But if you're doing that and then you have 4 other developers that are also doing that, well, first of all, your pull requests are going to create conflicts on each other. And well, do you really want to be updating the version that gets merged into the main branch? And well, if you don't want to do that, then you're going to want to have protections in place to prevent that from happening. Well, this is why basically I think the best you can do is pick a convention like it's going to use the latest in main, or it's going to use the latest release we've deployed to staging, or the latest release we've deployed to production. But allowing every developer to cherry pick the versions, that's the non-trivial part with this approach. So the other assumption that has come to mind is that even how we think about microservices or service-oriented architectures isn't universal. And depending on how you are doing it, is going to change how easy or hard your preview environments are. One pattern that I've seen at companies, at a couple of companies, these are companies that have built their architectures around Golang, is they will actually be building a monolith where they can bring up this whole app as a monolith, but they can also decouple it and deploy each service individually, even though it's the same exact code base, so they can scale it independently, but they can develop it as a monolith. And this is pretty interesting because then local development is really easy. Preview environments are really easy. And then but you know, staging and production, you can then break it out into multiple deployments that are scaled independently. I've also seen situations where companies have microservices-oriented architectures. Why? Well, because that's what you're supposed to do, right? No questions asked, just do it. And then they end up not really understanding why you're supposed to do it, and they create these tightly coupled distributed monoliths that are also really difficult to operate. So I think the maturity of a company in their software development process, in their adoption of microservices, really depends or influences how well you can achieve preview environments. So where should you start? Well, maybe just go back to the drawing board. First, go through these questions. 2, tackle the easiest apps first that don't have any backing services. Maybe consider just tackling your spas or your React apps, your front-end apps that can always just assume maybe that they can use the backend. I think one thing we didn't even go into is like feature flagging and how that could be helping you out implement these solutions by allowing code to merge into main. And then have the dependent services just use that feature. Vlad is giving a high five on that one.
Yes.
And okay, yeah, service meshes and all that. So it just turns out to be a much bigger question than I realized when I started thinking about it. Because when we first approached preview environments, we were like, yeah, we got this. This is easy. We just deploy it to its own Kubernetes namespace and we're done, right? Well, in the end, customers weren't always happy. And it's because there are all these other considerations that we were not taking into account for. So that was, Sharif, any questions so far? That was the first one of your questions that I talked to.
No, actually, this is how I was thinking about it. And like regarding creating like a distributed monolith of microservices, I think this is a problem in a lot of places that like you find a service that has like 7 dependencies and you can't test the feature without these 7 services or 5 services, and it really gets really complicated, especially when they are not connecting, like they are not like APIs or like they're like communicating through like RabbitMQ or Kafka or any queue, and things get really complicated because you can't like use a shared staging environment between them or something.
Yeah, no, it's true. And then what hurts more is why did they, and then the reason for doing it, there was really actually no reason they actually needed to do it. It was just done because of industry standards, quote unquote.
Yeah, the other thing I've seen just a method work for this in a very large, like more than 1,000 microservices type of environment is using Kubernetes namespaces. So basically they had like a development environment where all the services ran, but if you were working on a particular service that you wanted to test or do whatever, there was a way that you could pass in headers in your call to redirect certain services to your own personal namespace instead of like, and then everything else would run in the main shared development namespace. So it's a pretty, it was a pretty slick way of making it work.
Yay for re-implementing feature flags in a terrible, disgusting way. Whoa.
Yes.
Well, so I think it is an interesting pattern. I haven't seen it effectively work yet, but
so let me just say that it is feature flags in a terrible way, but it's also in an environment where like there were, hundreds of developers and all these people making changes on all different things at the same time. So it was really hard to manage a centralized feature flagging database at that point, but it's probably much easier now. So yeah, it maybe wasn't the best thing, but I've seen it at least work.
Yeah.
And
Also,
when I was working,
okay, sorry, go on.
oh no, please, sir, go ahead.
Yeah, so we tried to not use like AWS services, like you said, like not use RDS, not use the MSK, not use the managed RabbitMQ, but like for the S3 buckets, it was too hard to like create something. But we ended up like doing a namespace bucket. So the code itself will
exactly.
will use namespace directories. And we tried to do it with Kafka, to be honest. Like we like made the code itself use namespace topics, but I'm not sure how this will scale. Like I don't like it works for now, but I'm not sure it will scale very well.
Like,
I talk about like. I just want to say, I think that's also a good consideration. We didn't fairly say, like I said, like you don't want to use RDS because it takes so much time to bring up the RDS database. Well, the alternative is you could also have a shared RDS database cluster with multiple databases created dynamically for each preview environment. And that's another alternative as well.
So this is something that we do at SlideShare, where we're fortunate to have a very simple Rails-based system, and for our preview environments, we just use a shared staging environment, use the shared staging data set. So all the resources all the backend resources that are just needed for the monolith to consume are just shared. And so we don't have that concern. So like the underlying, the complexity that we talked about in this conversation, we've kind of like, we don't have that problem. So we're able to simply just use that mesh to route to whatever the preview we want to route to. And so that's very convenient for us. And it's very simple. But one thing that we did in a previous company that I used to work for at Pivotal Software, we had roughly 300 people across like 15, 17 service teams who were constantly generating new features and fixing bugs and making tweaks to the API for the dependent services to produce Cloud Foundry, right? And so the main thing that was happening all the time was integration testing, and this happened through just a very comprehensive set of integration tests that would just run all the time with the latest builds of everything. Right. And as soon as something went red, that would, be a call to the product owner to address that the compatibility issue and start that conversation. But it was a lot of work. It was just, we could not get around. The best that we could do was make it more efficient by having automated tests for integration. And that's really, I think, what's called for in your application for a complex multiple services that need to. Essentially, this is a release problem, right?
Vlad, I wanted to give you a shot. You had something to add?
Pinky promise I'm gonna be short. So I've been doing preview environments since I started with immutable infrastructure since 2016. They never work. They require, no, and I'm not kidding about that. This is a management and a leadership failure. I'm trying to be nice about it, but that's it. We don't want to fix our release pipeline. We don't want to learn new ways of developing software safely. We don't want to stay up to date and learn. So we're going to fix this with infrastructure.
Yeah.
It gets very, even if you get to implement this and it finally works and you release it to your developers, you're going to hit a lot of problems. You're going to have to maintain database golden images. And congratulations, you now have the AMI hell again, but for databases.
Yeah.
You are going to share a database and share all the connections and give a database per tenant, and your database is going to run out of connections, and it's suddenly going to not scale. You're gonna release this to your developers, and every single developer will see, oh, this is so much helpful. I can create an environment for this feature that I'm working on and leave it there for, I don't know, QA to test, a product to look at it, and your cost is going to explode. And then you're gonna get pressure to actually fix that, and it's not fixable. Preview environments don't work. They were a good idea when we didn't have better tooling and we could throw money at the problem. Today, they still make sense for companies where this is already implemented, they're aware of this, it's a migration, it takes forever to happen. They work for front end kind of, because front end deployments are cheap. But I think that trying to do preview environments today, instead of doing feature flags, is a fundamental mistake, and based on extensive experience building this, will require a lot more effort, a lot more money, and a lot more involvement than you expect for little to no benefit. I promise I was going to be short, so I was short.
I think that's a really
It's a detail.
interesting position as well. And I've
It's
seen it
I'm
happen.
glad you said it, but I think that if you do it correctly instead of a scalable, like if you manage the scope, you don't have the problems that you've
manage
outlined.
the scope.
You've got to manage the scope.
It never gets bigger, it never gets more complicated. And of course, I can run my own database and load balancer and thing inside Kubernetes and not use RDS.
No,
Stuff
I'm
that'll
saying
work in
if you manage the
development
scope and
environment and preview.
and you take the warnings that were kind of like we discussed about, like kind of iterated over, from Eric's conversation, you can avoid some of those problems. We use it successfully at Script, but we keep the scope very low. We have one service, we share a database. When somebody opens a pull request in GitHub, then a preview environment is built. 5-10 minutes later, they have their environment, it's up and running for QA. They can look at it, they can see their stuff in a production-like environment. Then when they close the PR or merge it in, then it all gets wiped out. So it works for us, and it doesn't cost us a ton of money. So it can be done, but your warnings are well noted. I think it's good to note those warnings.
I think also, like, if you scope it to one service and you're not depending on multiple services to test one feature, it is like an engineering mentality thing. Like, if we agreed on if we are doing like TDD or something, like we can, like, this API, it returns some sort of response. If it is okay, I don't have to test the whole flow. Like, I don't have to test the 5 services working together to see the feature. I can just test one. Like in the scope of preview environments, like you can test the whole setup on the staging environment. But for preview environment, we can just scope it to one service. That will simplify everything.
Yeah. Well, this has been a really great conversation, everyone. We are out of time for today. Thank you, everyone, for participating. I think this will definitely become an outtake for our Cloud Posse Explained series that Andy curates. Sorry, Sharif, we didn't get to your last question we had on the books. We'll bring that up next week because I think that's a really interesting question as well. All right, well, so everyone, if you haven't already subscribed to our YouTube channel, head over to youtube.com/c/cloudposse. Please hit those like and subscribe buttons. It helps us a great deal. If you haven't added me on LinkedIn, go ahead and do that. I love to stay in touch with everyone, see what's going on. That's where I get a lot of my news. Go to linkedin.com/in/Osterman to connect with me. If you haven't registered for our weekly office hours and you want a calendar invite, head over to cloudposse.com/office hours and register. We'll send you a weekly calendar reminder and iCal invitation. We look forward to talking with everyone next week, same time, same place, every Wednesday at 11:30 Pacific. Take care. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye bye.
Bye.